People think Seiko is collapsing. Stores are disappearing, dealer shelves are empty, and longtime fans are panicking online. But the truth is way more interesting than that. Let's get into it. Walk into a shopping mall that sold Seiko watches a few years ago, and there's a good chance the display is gone now. Maybe the jewelry store stopped carrying the brand. Maybe the watch section is half empty. Maybe the entire store closed down completely. To a lot of people, that looks like the beginning of the end. And honestly, it's easy to understand why fans are worried. For decades, Seiko built its reputation by being everywhere. Department stores, local jewelers, shopping malls, airport shops. Seiko watches were always there. You didn't need to be rich to own one either. That was the whole point. A Seiko was affordable, reliable, and respected. For many watch collectors, Seiko was the very first real watch they ever bought. A Seiko 5 SKX Diver. A simple automatic watch that introduced people to mechanical watches without forcing them to spend thousands of dollars. That's why people are reacting emotionally now. Because to them, it feels like Seiko is abandoning the identity that made the brand special in the first place. Seiko didn't lose these stores. Seiko chose to leave them. And that completely changes the story. A dying company loses distribution because stores stop wanting the product. Retailers stop making money. Customers stop buying. And eventually, the brand disappears from shelves because nobody cares anymore. That's not what's happening here. What's actually happening is much more intentional. Over the last few years, Seiko has been aggressively cutting ties with certain dealers and retailers, especially smaller mall jewelry stores and department store chains. But according to the company's own strategy, this wasn't about failure. It was about control. Seiko looked at the way its watches were being sold and realized something uncomfortable. The brand didn't look premium anymore. Imagine a typical mall jewelry store. Bright fluorescent lighting. Glass cases packed with dozens of random brands sitting next to each other. A Seiko watch squeezed between Fossil, Citizen, and fashion watches with giant discount stickers everywhere. That environment worked fine when Seiko's entire identity was built around affordable value. But it becomes a problem when you're also trying to convince customers that Grand Seiko deserves to compete with luxury Swiss brands costing thousands of dollars. And that's the key to understanding what's happening. Seiko today is basically three different brands trying to exist under one name. At the bottom, you still have the affordable Seiko watches most people know. Seiko 5 models, entry-level divers, solar watches, everyday automatic pieces. Then above that, you have prospects and higher-end collections aimed at serious enthusiasts. And at the very top, you have Grand Seiko, a brand that is no longer acting like a side project. Grand Seiko is now competing directly with luxury Swiss watchmakers. That's why Seiko has started opening special watch salons and premium boutiques instead of relying on random third-party retailers. These stores are carefully designed. Better lighting, better displays, better trained staff. Everything is controlled by Seiko itself. Because the company realized presentation changes how people value a product. And honestly, it's working. Financially, Seiko isn't struggling at all. In fact, the company's profits have actually been increasing during this entire transition. That's the part that completely destroys the Seiko is dying narrative. The reason profits are growing is actually pretty simple once you understand where the real money comes from. Most affordable Seiko watches don't generate huge profits individually. A Seiko 5 might sell in massive numbers worldwide, but the profit margin on each watch is relatively small. On top of that, managing thousands of dealers, stores, shipping systems, discounts, and retail partnerships becomes extremely expensive. Now compare that to a Grand Seiko. One customer walking into a boutique and buying a $10,000 Grand Seiko can generate more profit than dozens of lower-end watch sales combined. And unlike cheaper watches sitting in discount bins, luxury watches usually hold their value better and rarely need aggressive markdowns. That's why Seiko's strategy suddenly makes more sense. The company is focusing less on selling huge amounts of cheaper watches everywhere and more on building a stronger luxury image with higher profit margins. And honestly, they're not the first brand to do this. Fashion companies like Burberry and Coach went through similar transformations years ago. They closed weaker retail locations, reduced discount-heavy distribution, raised prices, and focused on making the brand feel more premium. At first, customers panicked. People said the brands were dying. But years later, many of those companies ended up stronger and more profitable than before. Seiko seems to believe the same thing will happen here. But there's another reason this shift is happening, and it might actually be even more important than profit. Customer data. For decades, stores owned the customer relationship. You bought your watch from a local jeweler, and the brand itself barely knew who you were. The dealer handled everything. But modern luxury brands don't want that anymore. Today, companies want direct relationships with buyers. They want customers shopping through official websites, official boutiques, and company-controlled stores. Because when customers buy directly, brands learn everything. What watches they searched for, how long they looked before buying, what styles they liked, what price range they considered, what they might buy next. That information is incredibly valuable, and that's exactly why Seiko is slowly moving toward more direct sales and fewer independent dealers. The company wants more control over the customer experience from beginning to end. The problem is, this strategy comes with a cost. Because while Seiko is gaining more control, it's also hurting relationships that took decades to build. Some small jewelry stores carried Seiko watches for 20 or 30 years. Family businesses built around loyal local customers suddenly lost authorization to sell the brand. In many cases, those stores simply couldn't afford the expensive upgrades Seiko wanted. Better displays, dedicated Grand Seiko sections, special staff training, premium presentation standards. For large luxury boutiques, those requirements were manageable. For smaller local stores, they weren't. So the partnerships ended. And this is where the emotional side of the story becomes very real. Imagine being someone who bought Seiko watches from the same local jeweler since the 1990s. You walk into the store one day expecting to see the familiar display, and suddenly it's gone. No explanation, no replacement, just empty shelves. To that customer, it feels personal. It feels like the brand they supported for years no longer cares about people like them. And honestly, there's some truth to that feeling. Because Seiko's priorities are clearly changing. The company still wants affordable customers, but the real focus now seems to be collectors willing to spend thousands of dollars on luxury pieces. That's why Grand Seiko has become such a massive part of the conversation. A few years ago, many casual buyers barely even knew Grand Seiko existed. Now it's being discussed alongside some of the biggest luxury watch brands in the world. The company isn't trying to become smaller. It's trying to become more valuable.